Today we'll be talking about lenses, probably one of the most popular topics on YouTube. Specifically, Cine lenses versus photo lenses. What makes them different? Are Cine lenses better, or in what circumstances they may be better than photo lenses? So first of all, here are the lenses I will use for the comparison. They are not identical, but they share enough similarities that we can use them for this purpose. So we have Sony 24mm 1.4 GM lens and DZO Vespid Prime 21mm, and this one is T2.1. So if that was a photo lens, it would be probably f1.8, something around that. So they're not exactly the same, but like I said, similar focal length, relatively similar maximum aperture, quite similar size as well. The weight is very different. They feel completely different when you hold them, but when you look at them, they are not too dissimilar, especially if you remove this massive lens cap. As you can see, pretty much exactly same length. DZO is a little bit longer and, well, slightly wider diameter. I think the best way to approach it is to look at the differences between these two lenses. So first of all, photo lenses. They are designed, well, unsurprisingly, for photo cameras, right? Mainly to take still images and video, of course, as well. But when manufacturers are designing those lenses, well, they think about very high resolution sensors. I mean, 24 megapixels being standard for even consumer grade cameras for a few years now. At a pro, and anything between 40 and 60 megapixels is really popular. 100 megapixels also more and more often, maybe at the moment in medium format realm, but certainly that's when the next generation of sensors is going. So these lenses have to resolve really, really sharp images. Second thing, really fast autofocus. If you're a photographer, you expect that the lens will not only focus really fast, but it also will be really good at tracking subjects, which means that while they're great for autofocus, they're not so good for manual focus. Even though there is a manual focusing ring on this lens, and this is, well, GM lens, so Sony's top range of lenses, this focusing ring has no feel to it. It doesn't have stops, and it's really not great for manual focusing. And that's a general trend with like pretty much any autofocus lens. In order for it to be good for autofocusing, usually you sacrifice good manual focus because the two kind of don't go well together. Another really important thing to consider is that each of those lenses is designed as an individual lens, not as a set. So even though there is a whole range of Sony GM lenses, they are not all designed to be the same. And what I mean by that is that they look very differently. They will have completely different sizes, different weight. The position of aperture ring, focusing ring, any buttons and switches may be completely different. Front diameter or the filter diameter will be different. Even if you want to get a set of lenses, let's say 2.8 zooms, 1424, 2470, 72-200, they will most likely have different front diameter or filter diameter and completely different size. I mean, the fact that the size is different, that's understandable. Of course, something like 70-200 lens cannot be the same size as 1424, but it's more of a fact that the position of any of the controls on the lens, rings or anything else, will be in different places. So if you want to use follow focus, or if you want to have someone controlling zoom or so on, basically you put geared rings and motors, you would have to reposition them for every lens because they are not standardized. And this also goes for the look of each of those lenses. They may render colors slightly differently, they may produce completely different flares, and in general they may have different character, different levels of sharpness and so on. They are not really designed to be consistent or very consistent across the whole set. And last but not least, with many modern photo lenses, they may be really, really good in terms of sharpness. I mean, they are usually very, very good in terms of sharpness and flare control and so on. But all of this may mean that very often they will just lack character. I remember even a good few years ago when I got Sigma Art 50mm 1.4 and compared that to Canon EF 50mm 1.2, the old 1.2 EF mount lens, not the current RF mount. Both lenses relatively similar, both 50mm, around 1.4 aperture. I mean, 0.4, it's not a huge difference, but they rendered image completely differently. Sigma was great, it was sharp, great colors, everything looked good, but it looked kind of soulless. It was too clinical, too clean. While Canon certainly wasn't designed to be the best lens. Actually, as far as I'm aware, that old 51.2 was designed to be quite soft, because the idea was that you use this lens mainly for portraits, mainly for its beautiful bokeh. So it was sharp or reasonably sharp in the center, but edges and corners were relatively soft. But it produced really beautiful images and also had really good flare. And to be honest, I much prefer Canon purely because of those imperfections. And I feel that this is something a lot of modern photo lenses are lacking. Which then brings me to Cine Lenses. So what we have here is DZO Vespid Prime. This one is 21mm. I have 40mm on a camera on the shelf there. It's pretty much identical. And that's the first thing about Cine Lenses. They are designed as sets, not individual lenses. So even though the size of the lens may change, especially when you look at very wide lenses and telephoto lenses, of course they have to be longer or quite short or have really big front element. There are certain design limitations you cannot go around. But most of them, if at all possible, they'll be very similar in size. I think when you look at those DZO Vespid Primes, everything from like 21mm to about 75mm is very, very similar. And if there is a difference, very often it will be this front part right here, right? So that may be longer, but the position of the iris ring, which would be aperture ring on a photo lens, and focusing ring will be the same on as many lenses as possible and very often on the whole set. This basically means that when I mount the lens on the camera and I have rails, on those rails there are motors control my iris ring and zoom ring. When I need to change the lens, I only change the lens. I don't have to reposition the motors. If it's on a gimbal, I don't have to rebalance it, unless of course the lens is much heavier at the front, but that's a separate thing. So the lenses are not designed to be the smallest or the lightest, but they are designed to be as consistent as a set as possible. And this also means that the look is meant to be as consistent as possible. Now, this lens is probably still more on a budget end of things as far as Cine Lenses are concerned. I know that a lot of people get upset when someone says that, oh, $2,000 lens, well, 2,000 Canadian dollars is considered budget. I know they recently slashed the price, but I'm looking at discount prices. There's, I think, version 2 coming out soon, so there will be probably again around $2,000 or so. Yes, it's a lot of money for a lens, right? This Sony GM lens costs relatively similar amount. But as far as Cine Lenses are concerned, this is really not that much money. Yes, you can get some cheaper ones, but even still sort of upper mid-range lenses, something like Zeiss or Sigma Cine Lenses, I mean, they will cost you easily $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 per lens. And at the top range, if you look at some of the Cooke lenses, top-end Zeiss, Leica lenses, they can cost 40, 50 grand per lens. Well, a set of lenses is enough to put a down payment for a house or buy a Lamborghini, right? So that's why I say that, well, $2,000 lens, as far as Cine Lenses are concerned, is actually more on a budget end of the scale. Why do I talk about this so much? Well, big part of the cost of those lenses is the fact that, like I said, they are designed as a set. They are designed to look the same across the whole set. So they will reproduce colors exactly the same way. They will very often have their own unique look. When it comes to Cooke lenses, I mean, you probably heard about Cooke look. It's a very specific look, and each set of lenses may look slightly differently, right? Just because it's, let's say, Cooke or Zeiss, it doesn't mean that every single Cine lens from this manufacturer will look the same. There are different sets of lenses and they all have slightly different look and feel to them. But within that set, they will all look as similar as possible. But back to the lens itself. So As you can see, it has iris ring without any stops, so you can adjust brightness in a smooth fashion. Iris in video lenses is the same as aperture in photo lenses, basically just controls the amount of light coming through the lens. You can also see that on Cine Lenses you have T-stops instead of f-stops. F-stop is a theoretical value. It's an approximation, so not every f1.4 lens will be equally bright. T stands for transmission, and it's supposed to be much more accurate. So that's why very often the values are a little bit different than on photo lenses. So that's why I said at the beginning of this video that T2.1 is probably something similar to f1.8 on photo lenses. Generally, T values will be always a little bit lower, a little bit darker than f values. That's our iris ring, and then we have focusing ring, and the main difference is, first of all, it has hard stops, so you cannot just keep spinning it constantly like you would with a photo lens. Second, it has really long throw, which may be a bit tricky if you want to go from one end to another. It will be a nightmare for autofocusing, right? Just turning all of that. But if you want to do precise manual focusing, that's exactly what you want, because then it's just so much easier to do those adjustments. And if you look at the scale at the short end, it takes quite a fair bit of movement to go like a fraction of, well, just a couple of centimeters, right? So we started from 28 centimeters, and this kind of movement only takes us 2 centimeters. If you keep rotating it, of course, the values are getting much closer. Here we are in meters, so this is 1 meter, this is already 2.5, and infinity. Makes sense. If you're focusing on something that's far in the distance, you have much bigger depth of field than if you're focusing on something that's really, really close. So that's what I was saying earlier. Lenses which are good for autofocus are not that great for manual focus, but also the other way around. This is not great if you need to use fast autofocus, and you can use autofocus with like LiDAR autofocusing systems. And one last thing about the design is the front diameter or the filter size. All lenses within one set have the same front diameter. There may be some rare exceptions, like for example very wide lenses. They tend to be a little bit, well, wider. The front element is a bit wider, but generally the whole set will have the same filter thread, so you can use the same size of lenses. And also the diameter of the lens itself, not just the filter thread, is the same. So if you putting band box on the outer side of the lens, that will be always the same. So again, when you need to change lenses, you can do it much quicker than faffing around with different filter sizes and so on. One last thing is the lens mount. So most Cine lenses will use mount like this, which is PL mount. Well, these days you can buy a lot of lenses which come in mounts specific for camera brand. I don't know, even Cook makes these days Sony E-mount lenses, for example. But the standard for Cine lenses is PL mount, which is interchangeable between different cameras, well, Cine cameras. And if you don't have a camera with PL mount, that it can be adapted to pretty much any other mount, or maybe even any other mount, because as you can see, it is quite deep, right? So if you're using mirrorless camera, it has very thin mount. Let's compare it. Well, the distance from the lens to the sensor is much shorter, so it's of course relatively easy to put something in between to make up for it. And just compare those two mounts, Sony E-mount here and DZO lens with PL mount. Look how much bigger this mount is, how much more solid it is, and that's because these lenses are generally quite heavy. A mount like this is simply not designed to handle all this weight. It can handle some of it, but quite quickly you will need to use lens support, so basically you're not putting too much strain on the mount itself, and well, eventually you can actually damage the mount. With a mount like this, you just slide this big metal tube into the mount, and yeah, you can put a lot of weight. Of course, with big lenses you still need support, but it's designed to hold a lot of weight and be really, really solid. Also, what's really important is how you mount this lens. With photo lenses, you put the lens on the lens mount and rotate it, right, until it clicks. With PL mount lenses, it works slightly differently. PL actually stands for positive lock, and well, basically this is kind of how it works. So what I have here is PL mount adapter. So on this side is Sony E mount, and on this side we have PL mount. So you rotate this ring, take out the lens cap or body cap, and then the lens, basically you just slide it in and then rotate this ring to lock it in place, and it goes nowhere. And then if you want to take the lens off, again, you just rotate the ring and take the lens off. It makes it much easier to change the lens this way rather than trying to rotate it. Fingers get in the way or motors get in the way. It may be difficult to wiggle it out. Also, this is relatively small, well, very small Cine lens. Some of them are absolutely huge, and that size and weight would make it much more difficult to change it this way. And also when you're handling a lens which is worth like, I don't know, 20 or 30 grand, it gets a bit sketchy, right? You don't want to drop it. You don't want to drop any lens, but certainly not one that's worth as much as a car. So that's PL mount. As I mentioned, recently a lot of lenses started coming out, Cine lenses started coming out without PL mount, or I mean even those Vespid Primes, they actually come in two versions. So you can change the mount yourself, you can unscrew it and you can put Canon EF mount on it. They come with two mounts. Sometimes you can get the same lens in a few different mounts and choose one you want. If let's say you'll be always just using, I don't know, Sony E-mount cameras or Canon RF or whatever, you can just get them in that mount. But if you're thinking that you may want to use those lenses across a range of different cameras, or you may want to upgrade to bigger, more serious Cine cameras in the future, PL mount is great because it just works across all of them. So I talked earlier a lot about the cost of Cine lenses, and well, you may think that since they are so expensive, they're automatically much better. And that's not necessarily true. I think the important thing to remember here is that they're just different tools for different jobs. Even though I have access to Cine lenses, I shoot most of the time with photo lenses. There are times when I much prefer to use a couple of Cine lenses. It basically all depends on the situation. Cine lenses are not the easiest to use for kind of run and gun shooting scenarios. If you always just work on your own, there's no chance that you will have an assistant or focus puller or anything. It's always just you and the camera. Well, you have to remember that with Cine lenses, you're either relying on manual focus, which in some cases can be quite daunting depending on the shooting scenario, or you may need to add LiDAR autofocus or something like that, which adds a lot of bulk, a lot of additional things to set up, additional batteries and so on, additional weight. And well, at the end of the day, it will not work as well as, let's say, Sony AF in Sony photo lenses. But on the other hand, well, a lot of those Cine lenses, they will have their own unique look. I really like the look of Vespid Primes because they have a bit of character, they have some really nice flares, but at the same time they don't have too much character. They are not too soft. They're I think just kind of right. Some people say that they're like budget version of Cooke lenses. They give you a little bit of that Cooke look at a fraction of the price. I'm sure a lot of people would be offended hearing that, but I can see some similarities, regardless whether it's anything like Cooke look or not. The important part here is that I like the look of those lenses. And that's the huge thing about Cine lenses. You can pick ones which fit your shooting style the most, or you can pick them depending on the job, right? Sigma lenses are well known for their really modern, clean, clinical, sharp look, which is great, for example, for a lot of corporate work or maybe ads and stuff like that. But if you want more stylized look, well, you will not go for one of those. And there are plenty of other options you can choose instead. So I think that's probably the biggest difference. Do you want a set of lenses with character, but the same character across the whole set? Or do you want convenience of having autofocus, having lighter lenses, having lenses that basically just work in pretty much any scenario? And like I said earlier, there is no right or wrong answer here. I don't think one is better than the other, just because these two lenses are relatively similar and are actually relatively similar in price as well. It's, I think, actually a perfect example that neither of them is better or worse than the other. They're just basically different tools for different jobs. So I think that's probably it for this video. Let me know if you have any questions or comments regarding either Cine Lenses or photo lenses or just anything in general. If you like the content of this channel, please consider subscribing, and I'll see you next time. Thank you for watching.